Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the 7th Annual Bhaktivedanta Swami Lecture in honor of His Divine Grace, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada, who is the founder, Acharya of the International Society for Krishna Consciousness. My name is Ngobile Simelane. I'm the Head of Marketing and Communications for Recreation and Parks at the City of Cape Town, and I feel very honored to have been invited to lend my voice to a forum that was created to engage leaders in questioning what really drives them as individuals from a belief system and a personal ethical code, and to challenge them to ask what moral standards do they personally bring into positions of power which so greatly influence society and create the experience of the world that we live in today. So this academic lecture series has been hosted at many of South Africa's tertiary institutions and is a flagship event on the events calendar of the Bhaktivedanta Book Trust in Africa. Our topic today is Rethinking Human Values. Coming out of 2020 and the COVID era, I think we as a people have really had to question who we are and how do we respond from a values point of view to the economic and health crisis in a way that benefits the most vulnerable members of society. So welcome to all of you who are tuning in on Facebook Live and on YouTube. Today we have quite a lineup of esteemed and accomplished speakers, and they are all great leaders in their own right. Firstly, I would like to welcome our guest speaker, Professor Thuli Madonsela. Professor Madonsela is a Sowetan-born modern-day heroine who served as South Africa's third public protector in 2014, and she was listed as one of Time magazine's top 100 most influential people in the world in 2016. Welcome, Professor. It's truly an honor to have you. Our keynote address this year is being delivered by Dr. Ramchunder Singh. He has served and made a remarkable contribution across a plethora of local and international companies. He's been a director on many boards. He's been director of petroleum and policy at the Department of Minerals and Energy, a director at Basil Reed Energy, a director at ISKCON South Africa. He is a trustee at the Bhaktivedanta Book Trust and a beloved grand disciple of His Divine Grace, Bhaktivedanta Swami. Welcome, Dr. Singh.
Thank you.
I would also like to welcome Mfundo Nkosi, who will be opening up the day for us today. Mfundo is the executive manager of the BBT, and he is a trustee of BBT Africa. He has served in the organization for more than a decade as an editor, liaison to Africa, and the head of events. Professionally, he is an environmental engineer working in South Africa's sustainability and renewable energy space, and he's a master's candidate at the University of the Witwatersrand in Johannesburg. Welcome, Mfundo.
Thank you, Ngobile. Nice to be with you.
Thank you, Mfundo. Over to you.
Thank you. Good afternoon, good evening, and good morning to all our guests from wherever you're joining us around the world. Welcome again to our honored guest, Professor Thuli Madonsela, and of course our keynote speaker for the 7th Annual Bhaktivedanta Swami Lecture, Dr. Singh. Everything we think and every action we take is based on our beliefs and values. Our values shape our decisions, and our decisions shape our lives. This, of course, can be extended beyond just the individual to the collective in the form of society. Human values, or the human values that we hold, shape our world. Ethical decision-making often involves weighing these human values against each other and choosing which value to elevate. Some values have intrinsic worth, such as love, truth, freedom, justice, equality, or compassion. These values that we may consider as moral imperatives are the values that we take into account when we grapple with questions of good and transparent governance versus corruption. They are the values we grapple with when we consider the advancement of technology in areas such as bioethics and artificial intelligence. It is the values we consider when it comes to environmental justice and conservation. And these are also the values we consider when faced with the questions of racial, gender, or class prejudice. The Bhaktivedanta Swami lecture, which is now in its 7th year, is a platform that elevates discussion of this nature to the public forum. It is a unique space that has allowed leaders from academia, both private and public sector, to look at the challenges that face the world anew from the vantage point of Vedic wisdom. Since 2013, the Bhaktivedanta Swami lecture has featured as BBT Africa's hallmark calendar event, partnering with the likes of the Nelson Mandela Foundation and the Ahmed Kathrada Foundation, and has attracted a diverse and global audience. The lecture series is named after His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada, or as we affectionately know him as Srila Prabhupada, who is the founder of the BBT. It honors his important literary and social contribution. He has authored and translated more than 70 volumes of books based on this timeless Vedic wisdom that was previously locked in the Sanskrit language. Today, his books are the preferred authoritative academic texts in Eastern theological studies from universities across the globe. So as Nobile said in her introduction to this lecture, the dramatic changes and social upheaval that we've seen presented to us in 2020, this is the perfect time for us to actually take a step back and to actually rethink the values that shape our world. And with that, without any further ado, we officially open up the Bhaktivedanta Swami lecture. I will hand over back to our Master of Ceremonies for today, Mobile Similani, and we look forward to a lovely discussion with you, the audience, and our speakers today. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mpundo, for that wonderful context and setting of the scene of what we're about to get into. I must say that our keynote speaker is no stranger to me. I'm looking at pages of accomplishments and accolades that he holds, and I've had the personal experience of seeing him in action in some of these roles as a committee member, and director. For example, he served as a trustee on the board of Minerals and Training Research Institute. He's been the chairman of Econ Oil. He has served as a director of CEF, the Central Energy Fund. It's quite extraordinary, the roles that you've played. And I'm sure that there have been many challenges as a leader in an industry that is so ridden on many occasions with ethical issues. But what many people don't know is that you're actually a scholar of Vedic knowledge. You are a well-respected member of the community and often teach from the Vedic point of view with regards to ethics and values. Dr. Singh, we are really looking forward to hearing from your perspective, what's wrong with our human values, and why do we need to rethink how we shape the world, particularly as leaders? Over to you, Dr. Singh.
Thank you, Nobile. Hare Krishna. A very special greeting to Professor Madonsela from a very rainy and cold Gauteng. I'm very humble and honored to share this discussion with you. Greetings to our moderator, Ms. Similani, and the executive head of the African BBT, Mr. Nkosi. I also acknowledge and bow my head to my spiritual master, and to His Holiness Advaita Swami, who's the founding trustee of the African BBT, who is connected online from New York. And of course, my heartfelt respects and obeisances to His Divine Grace, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada, in whose honor we have gathered this afternoon. Of course, Srila Prabhupada was a unique person, a scholar, a thought leader, a teacher, a guru, and a prolific author. He wrote and published, as we've just heard, over 80 volumes of spiritual literature, now translated in over 60 languages. So someone on the planet receives one of Bhaktivedanta Swami's books every 3 seconds. So his monumental work was the Srimad Bhagavatam. It is an epic philosophical classic that stands out amongst all written wisdom. We'll explore this topic, rethinking human values, through the eyes of this great spiritual teacher. His voice is a unique addition, a very unique addition to the spiritual archives of our day and age, and they offer very profound insights into human values. Of course, many philosophers and thinkers have contrasted the natural man who lived in tandem with nature, as opposed to the modern industrial man. And we see a shifting of ethical boundaries in that transition. Today, we see unbelievable greed, apathy, endemic corruption, unbelievable levels of corruption, selfishness, the abuse of the earth's resources, and the unchecked exploitative attitude has escalated to a point of planetary peril. So there is no doubt that our wildfire consumerism is hastening the demise of the biosphere. Yet there appears to be no respite. There is no letting up. Most efforts are like trying to punch the air. And there are major fault lines in the current model of humanity. So it's an undeniable fact that we live in very troubled times and we are exposed to deep inequalities in our society. On one hand, we have the power to share. On the other hand, we want to take it all. So the Vedic wisdom has a view on these human tendencies and trespasses. You know, we are very heartbroken when our leaders, political, societal, or spiritual, when they abuse sacred trust that we invest in them. To be trusted is actually a greater compliment than to be loved. Yet we see our children so often violated by the very persons they most trust. We see violence against our mothers, sisters, and daughters. Sometimes in this world, a man is alone. He has no brother to partner in the sense of a business partner. He may not even have a son who will inherit everything he creates. Yet, he spends so much of time piling up money and possessions, never satisfied. This may be even done through financial crimes. We see such a proliferation like bribery and corruption, which is such a pervasive feature of South African society. There is a Vedic text called the Ishopanishad. It declares that everything in this universe, whether it's animate or inanimate, it's both controlled and owned by a higher being. And man has a quota. Man is cautioned that he should not accumulate more than what's required. Of course, this statement sounds like a paradox. It is like an affront to our capitalistic mindset. After all, our education system, our social value system, these are the best cheerleaders for a life dedicated to accumulation and more accumulation. Srila Prabhupada explains that if we place a bag of rice in the center of the road, a bird will come by and just take one grain. Man will come by and take the whole bag. The question is why? Or what then causes a priest to molest a child or a public officer to be corrupt? Every person is an architect of his or her character. We often see some angel and some beast in the same person. The Vedic texts called the Bhagavad-Gita, which means a song of God, has been in human existence for north of 2 million years, spoken over 100 and 20 million years ago. It offers a very valuable clue to this dilemma. It's the modes of nature, the Gita says, that impels a particular action. Persons react differently to the same circumstances. So we are compelled to act. We are propelled to act by our innate nature. We are predisposed to act in a certain way. The Gita says we are all trapped by the modes of nature. So what are these modes of nature? Well, we take the human color vision is trichromatic. In other words, it has three primary colors, yellow, blue, and red. The Gita says that there are three modes of nature: goodness, passion, and ignorance. And the Gita also says that these three modes, they permeate every emotion, every object, every act, every choice in this world is influenced by these three modes, including the food that we might eat, the faith we keep, the work we do, the worship we make, the charity we give, and the philosophy that we might subscribe to. Indeed, every choice we make is a modal choice. It's either good, passionate, or dark, with infinite combinations between them. The Bible speaks about threefold cord that is not easily broken. From a Vedic perspective, this is the three qualities, the three modes of nature. Now, just to give more clarity on this, the Bhagavad-Gita is saying that one in goodness is marked by purity, calmness, knowledge, integrity, honesty, and one who is a flame in passion is marked by intense endeavor, desire to win at all costs. He's greedy, he's ready to shove, kick, and scratch and bite. Dirty dealings would come naturally to such a person. And the love of money for money's sake, unproductive greed, and a person aflame with passion will commit morally indefensible acts. Now, one in ignorance, the Gita says, is marked by darkness. Inertia, illusion, laziness is deceitful. He also has an unbridled lust for money. So when in ignorance, our inner world is warped. It's fractured, distorted, perverted, somewhat bizarre. It's in that state of mind that one is trapped in the modes that causes harm to others, tempted to steal and discriminate and prejudice, and hurt and deride. So in the human heart, these qualities, they mix in various proportions, the Gita explains, and they yield a combination of subtly differing temperaments. Much like how you take the three primary colors of yellow, blue, and red, you blend them to form countless colors, tints, and shades. So sometimes one primary color will prevail in the mix, sometimes another color will prevail. The Gita says that worldly life exists within this trimodal system of goodness, passion, and ignorance. So you and I, we become colored by these three modes. Our impulses, our choices, our desires are all lined up according to the modes we are in. Even a romantic attraction, we're either attracted or we're repulsed, depending on the mode of nature that I am in and the mode of nature the other person's in. So in choosing music or career or food or recreation, we choose and attach ourselves to a particular combination of modes. So the world, the Gita explains, is moving under the spell of these three modes. Every action at every moment is directed by the three modes, just like the laws of nature control the movement of the moon, the planets, and the stars. The laws of nature also control small bodies like yours and mine. So spirituality in the Vedic sense means to surpass these modes. We've got to rewire the inner being, not the person we see in the mirror, the inner being that requires inner spiritual engineering. We must change on the inside to become a better person on the outside. Now, we cannot change human values just through law, just through some just training, without spiritual change. One can only get beyond the modes when one sees himself as a spiritual being and acts accordingly. So to transcend these modes, we must connect to the spiritual entity. That spiritual energy will direct us to the people we associate with, the food that we eat, we'd be more regulated, we'll aspire for higher things. In this way, we revive our spiritual nature. It is said that man is made in the image of God. This is supported in the Vedic texts. We are each a little drop of divinity. We're intrinsically, innately capable of pure goodness and pure consciousness. So, at the very minimum, we would want our leaders and teachers and parents to be in the mode of goodness. You see, the human being is a very complex species. There's a thing called ethology. Ethology, a discipline called ethology, the study of animal behavior. It shows that nature seems to have its own IQ. If you take this anglerfish, this fish lives deep in the ocean, in the most darkest parts of that ocean. And it has an appendage, a bioluminescent bulb above its mouth. So a small fish is attracted by this light. It comes within range of this fish and only to be snatched and eaten. Now, how amazing is that? Such an innovative predator, a deceptive hunter, such instinct for both migration and orientation, and it's just a fish, one little fish. Now consider the most advanced being in the living world. That's you and I and everyone else on this call. We can think philosophically. Our living interest goes beyond the search for food. We can express ourselves. We have the greatest freedom. We have total free choice. We appreciate art and music. We are capable of generating the kind of higher consciousness associated with human ingenuity, with our ability to make plans and write poetry. So the Vedic view is that the human being is a complex machine. He's designed for a higher purpose. We have advanced cognitive ability, such sharp instrumentation, and such developed awareness. So the question then arises, why should I use such heavy and sophisticated human machinery to pursue things that don't have a permanent value? Like greed, the celebration of ill-gotten stock gains, or the commercialization of religion and charity, overaccumulation, vengeance, exploitation, violence, and corporate greed. Even if I corner every deal, I own every dollar on the planet. Still, it's destined that I will lose it all at the time of my death. So my power, my wealth, my influence, my domination, my exploitation has an endpoint. Interestingly enough, in South Africa, the statistical life expectancy is 63 years and 6 months. That's only 23,000 days. We have about 800,000 people who are between the ages of 70 and 74, and we have hardly 1 million who are over 75. So we are all in a waiting room. We are all queued up, waiting to exit to an afterlife. Whatever our belief system is, we can all agree that life at some point in time comes to a dramatic end. Now, this world is the land of dying. We see it every day, whether we live in a hut, in a leafy suburb, a penthouse, or a monastery. And the moment man contemplates his or her mortality, his interest in spirituality will manifest. This vast, powerful human machine and its prowess is really a depreciating asset. Whether one is a conqueror or a king or a magistrate or a mosquito, we will all exit this world at some point in time. So if I conclusively and objectively know that my human life is a depleting asset, that time is running out, then my behavior, my moral compass, my priorities, the compassion that I might display, my worldview, my humanity fundamentally will be refocused and redirected. So the Vedas are emphatic. To rethink my humanity, I must at the deepest level realize my mortality. I'm a transient being. Humanity is a transient arrangement. And A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada taught that these temporary beings, you and I, we each allocated some quantity of time. And that time is the most precious human asset. Like you cannot step into a river twice. The water at your feet has passed. That moment is gone forever. And time is short. Time is passing. It's uncertain. It's irrevocable. When gone, we cannot recall time. We cannot recycle it and we cannot repurchase it. Although time is the most valuable thing, yeah, it actually has no transactional value. It cannot be bought or sold or exchanged or even transferred to our loved ones. It's one thing that one cannot corrupt. You cannot steal time from anybody. You cannot take more of it. It's not within our grip and not within our grasp. Time is like this greatest tyrant. It's an unceasing, all powerful force. And it controls our every moment till our very last moment. Now, each of us, we're given a stock of time, 60 years or 80 years. And the Vedas say that we're all given so many life breaths. Now, think about it objectively. Man remains greedy for the sake of getting ahead. We're ready to push and to shove and to scratch and to bite and to kick, only to fall victim to time. So these trespasses and social diseases like insider trading, corruption, prejudice, bias, exploitation, greed, and violence, all these negative actions, these negative deeds, they yield no good or good fortune in the greater scheme of time. And at the end, the so called short term gains are all wiped out in a moment of time. So a great philosopher once said, when I die, put my hand outside the coffin so people can see that I'm taking nothing with me. So, to be more productive as an individual, family, as a community, as a country, as a nation, or even as humanity, we have to strive for that quality of goodness that the Gita is talking about. That quality of goodness and beyond. We must revive our spiritual being with the limited time at our disposal. If somehow or the other we are able to do that, then we are able to create a world that we all aspire for. Now, in conclusion, I've been given 15 minutes. In conclusion, these deficits in moral and ethical conduct is a scar on society. Each one of us must take responsibility for that. It's a blemish on humanity. The energy that greed generates is phenomenal. It is also evident that we are at the mercy of sacred forces much larger than ourselves. There is no doubt there is an interface between spirituality and the environment. We coexist in this environment with other creatures and other entities. In essence, the human being is a spiritual being. The material realm, no matter how extravagantly organized, it cannot afford shelter any more than land can shelter a fish. And Srila Prabhupada has presented a chain of Vedic evidence to show that a society disconnected from its spiritual values will induce both personal and societal calamities. If we want men and women of character, leaders with integrity, we need to find the headwinds to commence an inward journey. When leaders speak, their words matter, but their actions matter more. The Gita says, what a great man does, common men will follow. You know, in ancient times, the great Vedic kings, as leaders, they would even take responsibility for the calamities such as drought, famine, and diseases. These were true leaders providing protection to those under their care. If I have money in my account, I can help others by sharing it. In the same way, I can only express love and compassion and humanity if I actually have love and compassion in my heart. I can only become a true servant of the people, a true leader, a valued member of humanity, if, when darkness descends, I am prepared to be the holder of the candle. The Vedas say that a leader, the holder of the candle, must liberate his dependents. That means he or she must himself be free of vice, must have higher knowledge, must himself be free from all these powerful modes. So to enhance the finer aspects of human values, we must spiritualize society, rewire our thinking, and develop a higher consciousness. Because leaders come from society, A spiritualized society will produce spiritualized leaders. Srila Prabhupada had shared a formula of how best to re-spiritualize society by calling on the names of God. His books are unique in its exposition. It has philosophical precision and theological depth, and it shares a very unique perspective on how to rethink and reshape human values. I want to thank the African BBT for hosting this event today, and in particular this topic. I strongly recommend the books and the writings of His Divine Grace, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada, as an excellent starting point to begin that most important inward journey. Thank you very much. Hare Krishna.
Thank you so much, Dr. Singh. I feel it's an injustice to just give you 15 minutes to cover so much, but you certainly did it justice. We're receiving so many comments from our YouTube and Facebook Live viewers, some of which are just highlighting some of the important points you made. I mean, I picked up that, wonderful point on how a spiritualized society will come about from spiritualized leaders. How we are all, conditioned souls, having this human experience and acting under the modes of ignorance and passion, and should be, moving towards the mode of goodness. And wonderful to know that there is such a library of information available that His Divine Grace, Swami Bhaktivedanta, has made available to humanity to learn how to transgress through these different modes to create this spiritualized society. Thank you very much for introducing us and delving into some of these points. Next, I would like to welcome our esteemed guest, Professor Madonsela. As I mentioned, she has so many accolades. We all know her as a beloved advocate, professor of law. She is currently the chair of social justice and founder of the Tuma Foundation for Democracy, Leadership, and Literacy. With her extensive background in applied administrative law principles, mainly based in public service, she is the ideal person to bring to us today some insights into why it is so important, to consider going into our values, and someone who has been dedicated to social justice and democracy and has written extensively on these matters, surely will bring us a wonderfully intellectual but heart, rendering address. So welcome, Professor Madonsela.
Thank you. What a privilege to participate in this event that celebrates the Bhaktivedanta Swami lecture. Even more of a privilege was sitting here and listening to the lecture given by the doctor. I'm of Christian faith. One of the questions posed by a member of my family was, why are you participating in this event that is not organized by Christians and it's organized by a different faith? I said to the member of my family, I'm participating for two reasons. One, this is about shared values. But secondly, this is a conversation that is taking place at a time when the world needs this conversation about rethinking values. We are where we are because we haven't paid attention to the values that underpin the decisions that have brought us here. I just want to apologize. I'm about to lose I'm about to lose my connectivity. I just want to connect. An apology.
Not a problem, Professor.
This is terrible, but I apologize. I picked it up.
Perhaps in the meantime, we could take one question for you, Dr. Singh, whilst we wait for the professor. We're just going through your comments, and there was one on in an age where corruption wreaks havoc in our government and corporate systems, the age of Kali Yuga is more rife than ever. How can we instill value systems that change this?
Yeah, it's a very good question. You know, it starts with every individual. It starts with every individual. The value systems that Prof is back. I think we should go back to Prof. Yeah.
Okay, we'll park that.
Yeah.
Well, I was happy to listen to Dr. Singh. As I said, one of the joys of being here today was honestly sitting here and listening to the lecture that was given by Dr. Singh. And as I said, the main reason I came was because of shared values, and secondly, because I do believe that we're having this conversation at a time when we need to have it. We are here, we are where we are as the world because of the choices we've made. As Dr. Singh said, we're given free will. Our Creator has given us free will, but it would appear that many of the choices that we took, we didn't realize the consequences of those lectures. So when having a conversation about rethinking human values, we also need to link that conversation to what kind of leadership is values driven. And secondly, what values are supposed to give us a life where there can be peace in the world and joy in the world. This conversation that you're having reminds me of a TED talk I once listened to, where the person presenting the talk said, one thing interesting is there isn't a U-Haul van at a funeral. Very dear people passed in the last 2 days. People who are dear to me, Priscilla Jana being one of them, another being Dumisane Lubisi, editor of the City Press. And none of them are going to take a Stataford van truck with them. And how do we celebrate them after they're gone? All we can celebrate are the footprints that people leave in this world. Nobody wants to know, for example, who was the richest person at the same time that His Grace Bhaktivedanta Swami lived or wrote the things that he wrote. We don't know who was the richest person. We don't know who was the best dressed person. We don't know who was the most popular person. Yet many people during our time live craving those things. They crave being wealthy, being dressed in designer clothes, and in being instantly popular. And certainly the decisions of the people who are craving wealth, instant recognition, and popularity impact all of us. Hence, we live in a difficult age, the age of anger, social fracture, and global warming. At the Tuma Foundation, we discovered that the answer to this is leaders that are ethical, purpose-driven, impact-conscious, and committed to serve. And therefore, when we're talking about rethinking human values, it's really, for me, is about rethinking human values and getting regrounded back in Ubuntu. I am because we are. My humanity is tied up with yours. I protect you. If I protect you, I'm protecting myself. If I harm you, I am harming myself, because together we will do better against the elements. So a return to Ubuntu means returning to values of humanity, honesty, generosity, human solidarity, compassion. If we look at why are we here, we have to look at what did we celebrate that brought us here. I was listening again to Dr. Singh's lecture and comparing to the notes that I had on my slide. And one of the things that I say here is, over the years, we have celebrated raw capitalism, the kind of capitalism where honesty doesn't matter, where what we refer to as shareholder interest is all that counts. And that was, of course, the vision of human coexistence that was inculcated by economists such as Hayek and Friedman. And we celebrated people because they made money. We didn't ask questions: where, how, and who was affected. And here we are today. In a few days' time, my family and I will be launching a book, a children's book, that is trying to do what you are doing as the BBT Africa, which is start with children and grow with humanity from cradle to grave, teach people values, reinforce those values. One of the stories we tell in that book is the story of a king that was about to exit this world and needed an heir to succeed him. They brought him 3 of the best young people in the community to choose from. When he reflected on these young people, they were all equally competent in terms of their skills, their wisdom, their excellence on all fronts. He then gave them a task. All 3 of them were given 3 seeds to go and plant these seeds and come back in 5 years with fruits. 5 years later, the first young person came back and said to King Nene, here, only 1 of the seeds germinated, and here is the yield, sir. The second young person came and said, here am I, say, all 3 seeds yielded the best fruits in the world, the best trees in the world and with the best fruits in the world, and here is the fruit, sir. The last young person came with a cap in hand and said, sorry, my lord, none of the seeds germinated. The question is, who would you have taken as your successor if you were the king? In this particular case, King Nene chose the 3rd young person because the other young people misunderstood the task as being about success at all costs. Whereas the task he wanted was to show their integrity, because he knew that the sustainability of his nation, the sustainability of his community was going to depend on a leader that had integrity. And therefore, he chose the 3rd young person. I look at what has happened today and where we are. I do think that at times we rewarded people because they delivered without asking, how did they do it? Hence, people get glorified in the media for successful companies, for big cars and things like that, without asking, was that done in a manner that ensures environmental sustainability, human sustainability, and the values of care, compassion, and truth? Just lastly, at the Tuma Foundation, we have come up with an ethical leadership model because we thought that it's not enough to just teach ethics. Often people come across ethical dilemmas where you're not sure what is right and what is wrong, or what is right has some wrong in it. And you need a way of determining which of the two wrongs to take, or which right is more right, so to speak. I'll give an example where, for example, let's say you're a bank manager. Maybe let me not give you that example. Let me give you my life example where I was public protector, and towards the end of my term, I was attacked left, right, and center by people who felt that my investigations had given them a tough time. They had me investigated by the Hawks for perjury. Perjury is lying in court. And they said I lied in court by saying the powers of the power protector were binding in one court, and in another court I said the powers of the power protector were not binding in Pretoria. And this was true. I had said in Cape Town the powers of the power protector were binding, and in Pretoria I had said the powers of the power protector were not binding. Or at least that's what the papers said, which were signed by me. And when we checked this, we found that I hadn't read the papers in Pretoria. So that's improper. That's suggesting that I was not as competent as possible. And one of the lawyers advising me said, let's just say in this affidavit that you changed your mind. And of course, you have a right to change your mind. That would have been an easy path, avoiding the cost of being seen as incompetent at a time when the office was under attack. And therefore people would have said, if she can drop the ball on this one, what else has she been dropping the ball? So to look good publicly, I had to do something bad, which is lie and say, I changed my mind. I knew I hadn't changed my mind. My staff would have known I hadn't changed my mind. The very same lawyers that I was working with would have known that I hadn't changed my mind. So what would have been the impact of this decision? Just from an ethical dilemma, I would have chosen this to avoid the cost of my institution being seen as incompetent, and me personally as being seen as incompetent. That's what would appear to have done. But the impact would have been two ways. One is I would have been communicating to my team that in this place, we should lie when we're in a tight spot to get out of trouble. I would also have been communicating that you too can lie when you are in a tight spot, because as leaders, we are free to lie when we're in a tight spot. And I would also be communicating that I'm not trustworthy because I lie when things are difficult. To look good, I lie. But that would not have been what I was intending to. And this is where we say leaders need to be impact conscious. And when you are choosing between two situations, you always have to think about what is the purpose of your institution? What is the purpose of your leadership? What impact do you want to cause? What kind of culture do you want to create in this organization? And in my case, I chose to just admit that at that particular moment, I was incompetent for not reading this. Yes, I was in a hurry, but I just didn't read it. And in so doing, I embrace vulnerability, that the public would know that there are things that I also don't always do right. And obviously took the risk of being seen as sometimes incompetent. But in the process, I paid the price there and then. And one mistake leaders make is thinking that if you choose to avoid integrity, you avoid paying the price. The truth is, there's always a price for making a decision. It's a question of whether you pay now or you pay later. During my time as a pop protector, we then came across this model of leadership of helping you to resolve your ethical dilemmas by always thinking about ethical. What is right here? Right for me, right today, right tomorrow, and right for everyone. Is this fair? Is it just? So ethical. Is this fair? Is it just? Is it truthful? Is it building a society for everyone? Purpose driven. What's the purpose of my leadership? And what is the purpose of this decision? Is it contributing to creating a society where everyone thrives, where everyone's potential is freed, but above all, where there's peaceful human coexistence? Thirdly, impact conscious. What's the immediate impact? Is it aligned with the purpose? Because the purpose might be good, but the impact might be wrong. Lastly, committed to serve. Is my decision committed to serve everyone? Because often we make a decision that will serve me and people like me. And that for me is an approach that we call justice as just us. From a spiritual point of view, you say that kind of decision is based on an ethnocentric view of the world as opposed to a worldly based leadership model. And I think as leaders, it becomes important that we make decisions that are not just protecting ourselves as individuals, our families, or people like ourselves. We make decisions that protect everyone. But just lastly then to say, but there are rays of hope. We've listened to Dr. Singh and I've listened to leaders. COVID-19, Sustainable Development Goals, and everything that has happened to bring us to our knees as humanity has helped us to rethink human values. So life, the consequences of our bad leadership, there are consequences of deviating from Ubuntu and all other human values that are enduring is global warming. It is a fractured world, an angry world, and a lot of pain that goes with that. And I think the world is recognizing that. And as a result, I think we're getting back to reclaiming human values such as Ubuntu, such as love, such as empathy, solidarity, fairness, integrity, and justice for all, and not just justice for ourselves. So the future for me is beginning to unfold differently. I foresee the next 10 years being a period when humanity is going to reflect better on human solidarity, on social justice, and on integrity. But for that period to really continue to grow in the right direction, we need to connect our lives as we are doing right now. And that's why I think this lecture is one of those wonderful things where people who are about reclaiming human values or rethinking human values come together and join their lives. Ethiopians say when spider webs combine, they can tie up a lion. Justice Muhoro spoke earlier today about water. It takes little droplets of water to come together. But when these droplets of water come together, you see the mighty power of water. And I do think that those of us who have realized the pain of deviating from good human values come together to reclaim good values such as love, care, compassion, truth, and integrity, and ultimately the values of Ubuntu. And we regenerate these values in everything we do and in our children. I do believe that this world will indeed become a better place. So thank you for the opportunity to participate in this lecture. I do believe that this is part of the beginning of a better period in the life of humanity and our common habitat, which is planet Earth. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Professor, especially for being willing to share your personal testimony. It was such a a teachable moment, and the vulnerability didn't stop when you're, public protector. It continues on. And one of the key messages I took from your talk was, that you need to risk being judged to uphold your values. And that's okay, because you'll live to tell the tale. Pay the price early on, pay the cost early on, but, still be able to live with yourself and continue to lead with integrity. Another wonderful point was that people resonated with on the comments as well, was this value of Ubuntu. And with our international community tuning in, really nice that you touched on how it's important to teach the value system of Ubuntu while still young, but it's really the application of it in adult life, that matters in terms of your character. How has that upbringing, what do you bring to the table when it's tested? So thank you very much for being that living example that we can all look at and think there's a role model when times are difficult that we can look up to. We really appreciated that. So now it's time to try and tackle some of these questions. We have a very interactive audience, and I think we will start where we ended off with you, Dr. Singh, with regards to the question around this age of corruption. Professor Madonsela also touched on how this is an age of anger, and how we overcome it. So the question was from Bhavik Makan, who wanted to know, in this age where corruption wreaks havoc in our government and our corporate systems, the prophecy of the age of Kali Yuga, which is the age of quarrel, it holds more rife than ever now. So how can we instill value systems that actually change the system within the age that we're in?
Yes, I think it's a very good question. Prof may have covered a few of those points in her presentation. The reality is that the human mind, the human being, has full potential for goodness to its optimum. Now, you never teach a child, for example, to be racist. This is things you pick up as you grow old and you interact with the world. So the foundational basis of divinity, whatever faith we belong to, the instilling of qualities that helps the individual person appreciate nature, appreciate people around him or around her, appreciate everything we have. Like, for example, it's raining here in Johannesburg, and we needed the rain because, Johannesburg, it's been very dry, so you needed it. So we're grateful that there's rain. Now, in the ultimate analysis, everything in this world belongs to a divine creator. And you can test this as much as you want to. You can analyze it. If there was one title deed issued by one supreme constitutional court, it'll be in the name of God. So we are just somehow or the other in transition, as I was saying. If we acknowledge that we are just, an extension of a spiritual system, and we are just like leasing things, we don't claim false proprietorship over them, and we do more to share what we have, and we do more to take an internal journey. That internal journey means, really going internally in the heart and seeking out those, those great qualities of forgiveness and honesty and integrity. And sometimes we would falter, because we are human. But as Prof said, you stand up and I made a mistake and you take it on the chin. So the Vedas gives a particular process for this kind of internal adjustment. And it says that if one chants the name of God, like in the Bible, it says, from the rising of the sun to the setting, God's names should be chanted. And that helps change the consciousness and better appreciate, what we have and why, and that we are in transition. Because really speaking, as I was saying in my little presentation, we will one day exit the stage. So when the day comes, we need to know or be prepared for that day. So the chanting of God's names in this particular age is the most prominent or the most recommended methodology for reviving our internal connection with the Creator. Yeah?
Yes. Thank you so much, Dr. Singh. On a practical note, maybe this one coming through via email for Professor, there's someone wanting to know that, communities have had a value system since time immemorial. It's not like we're trying to create something new. And yet the tide of materialism, it just keeps gaining momentum day by day. So how does one really stay true to themselves against the attractions of this materialism? How do we practically do that for the benefit of community rather than just myself?
Well, thank you. The answer lies in the total lecture that was given by Dr. Singh. For personal choices, you have to really decide, what do you want to live in this world? And if you want to leave a legacy of leaving this place better than you found it, then of course you're going to make choices that improve the quality of life for all of humanity. But the truth is, even with good intentions of wanting to leave this place better than we found it, when we are spiritually empty, we seek affirmation from outside. Every human being seeks to be significant. But sadly, other people think their significance is going to come from having the best looking house, the best car, the best clothes, and popularity. And therefore, they're going to amass material things to prove their worth. And if you know your worth, then you won't want your worth to be confirmed by someone who's not even respecting your worth, who's respecting the clothes you're wearing, the Gucci clothes you're wearing, or a Valentino, or whatever clothes they are. And I'm not against people wearing designer labels. It's just when you're going to steal or engage in corruption or engage in extractive business relationships, very ruthless, being a mine that has a social contract, as, for example, Lonmin had, where you're supposed to uplift the lives of communities whilst you are also making profit, and you take all of the profit and you leave the communities devastated. It's because you seek value in these material things. And the truth is, you're going to die and leave these things. And as I said in the beginning of my lecture, a few years later, nobody will know you ever lived, because nobody cares about who used to have the best clothes, the best car, and things like that. So if we just make sure that we get connected to the power that created us, and it doesn't matter what that power is. For me, I believe that power that created me is God. And if you are in sync, when you are in congruence with the power that created you, you feel anchored, you feel worthy, you feel valued, and you feel energized to be a force for good in this world without needing the world to affirm you or the world to worship you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor. Just wondering what you would say to the non-believer, for someone who doesn't draw inspiration from a religious perspective and yet finds themselves in a position of power or leadership. Where then would they find inspiration for a value system?
Wonderful. If you're a non-believer, you still want to live in an ecosystem where you are not going to be killed by somebody who's hungry. Your daughter is not going to be raped by somebody who feels left behind. You're not going to be hijacked regardless of whether you live behind a high wall or a low wall. You would like a world where people respect you as a human being, respect the people you love, and respect your property. But if we treat this world badly, if we still are corrupt and we lie and we engage in extractive relationships, we poison the ecosystem in that we contribute to the anger. So I would say, whether you're a Christian or a spiritual person or not, know about the impact of your leadership in the environment. The epic leadership model, for example, is not based on Christianity or any faith. It's just about do what is right because it's right for you and right for the environment you want to create now and for the future. Be careful about aligning all of your actions every day with the purpose of your power and the purpose of the country you want to live in and the world you want to live in. And again, always be impact conscious. And your commitment to serve should not be justice is just us. It should be justice is justice for all, because as long as there's injustice somewhere, there can't be sustainable peace anywhere.
Thank you very much, reminding us that, we all enjoy the benefits of moral society, and it's our responsibility to contribute to that. Perhaps I'll take one now from YouTube. This one is from Jayant and Mayuri Ramji. Perhaps to you, Dr. Singh. Seems someone who is more familiar with the writings and the works of Swami Bhaktivedanta. They're asking, knowing that these conditions of poor social values that we're experiencing now were already foretold by such an esteemed scripture as the Srimad Bhagavatam, should we try to change what is inevitable? So if the world is already moving towards doom and gloom, even scripturally speaking, should we bother to even change that?
Yeah, it's not theologically correct to say that. The Bhagavad-Gita, the book we spoke about, has 5 truths in it. Of the 5 truths, one is time, which we spoke about. The other one is the soul, and there's a super soul, and there's material nature. The 5th one is karma. So this person is suggesting that if I'm destined to be where I am, what can I do? I just sit in the corner and cry and just live out whatever is dished out to me. But the Vedic scripture says that karma is changeable. It's one of those 5 truths that's changeable. Now, even in this particular age, which is a particularly difficult age because persons are short-lived, always angry, they have poor memories, tempted, to accumulate more, etc., and move away from divinity. Even in this age, it's described that the names of God in this particular age are particularly potent to remove us from that particular situation. If we have $100, my $2 problems are sorted out. So being connected with divinity, you have $100. So the little things that comes on the side, you have your focus. You're connected to a higher calling. I wanted to make a quick comment, and Professor made the statement about the spider, for example. A spider spins a web. It's 100 times thinner than the human hair. Now, this spider did not go to a trade school. I don't know if there's a trade school that could teach a spider how to spin a web 100 times. So we have to accept that. To this person who might say, I'm a non-believer, etc. Well, explain the spider's web. How is it this spider can spin this web, you see? So there has to be somebody behind, some intelligent design, somebody orchestrating it, somebody has to be. And we are all, as humanity, the common children of this common father. Yeah? Nobile?
Yes,
I just wanted to make that point, yeah.
Thank you very much. I think we'll remember some of these examples going into the week when we see our spiders on the wall. Thank you. Okay, I think the next question is for both of you. There was a question around Eurocentricity versus Africanism. Just looking for it to come up on the screen, please. Okay, so the question is, how do we reconcile Eurocentric and Afrocentric leadership in modern society as we are actively moving towards decolonization? How do we reconcile this Westernism and our Africanism in terms of leadership in modern society?
This question must be for Prof. Must be for Prof. It's above my pay grade. It's above my pay grade.
Thank you, Dr. Singh, and thank you, Nobile. Thank you to the questioner. I'm at a stage in terms of my own human development where I am saying we shouldn't reject the values of any continent simply because they belong to that continent. Europe underdeveloped Africa, but Europe developed from Africa. A whole lot of things that we now attribute to the Western world are what the Western world has integrated, because humanity has been interacting for many years. The Greeks, for example, we know them as having invented democracy, but you will recall that before 5th century Athens had democracy, they had already started interacting with Ethiopians that had very, very extensive democratic orders. They had started interacting with Egypt. When Romans created mathematics, they had started interacting with Egyptians that were highly developed in maths. My view is we should pick up the best of human values. And what Steve Biko put on the table was Ubuntu. And Steve Biko said that the world, other continents have given the world big guns and advanced industries. And Africa's contribution to the world would be to give humanity a human face. And again, if you go to the wild, you go to tribes that have been untouched by greed, you will find that survival of humanity depends on us remembering our interdependence on each other. Interdependence as a group, interdependence between groups. And therefore, I won't reject anything from Europe. I would say there's something we can find from Europe. There's something we can find from China. But when it comes to how do we interact with each other, Ubuntu is the best way to go, because truly we are interconnected as humanity, and we are also interconnected with our environment. And what we do with each other should always be based on making sure that we assure each other's survival, because together we're better against anything that we have to face as humanity.
Powerful response there, that we take the best of any society to better our global society. Thank you very much for that answer. Dr. Singh, would you say that Swami Bhaktivedanta would resonate with the message of Ubuntu? You know, we have so much influence from that Vedic culture, which many people in Africa may not be familiar with. So how would you say that he may have lived or promoted these values of Ubuntu through his works, his writings, and this international society that was created from the Western world, even though it came from an Indian Swami? How do you marry the message of Ubuntu with the Vedas?
Well, Bhaktivedanta Swami went to the United States at a very advanced age, and all he took of them was his books. And although he traveled the globe 12 times in those short years he was here, he came to Africa 5 times. And he gave very specific instruction about what we do in Africa. So his Bhaktivedanta Swami's approach was, if you gave transcendental knowledge, because knowledge is, you see, you cannot date knowledge. When we speak about these different leadership systems in Eurocentric or Afrocentric, you actually cannot date knowledge. If I had to ask somebody, what date did knowledge start? You wouldn't be able to date it. the knowledge that Bhaktivedanta Swami brought was eternal knowledge, things about really deeply metaphysical. Who are you? Where have you come from? What is the purpose of your life? And what will happen to you when you die? If you are interested in these 4 things, Bhaktivedanta Swami said that I'm translating these books for you. And he spent so much of time translating these books. Now, his whole objective was to build a house in which the whole world can live in. And in that house, there is no differentiation of persons from different backgrounds. You'll be surprised to know that the society he started is represented across every culture. Every major city in the world has a project that's named after him. And he gave instructions like nobody within 10 kilometers from any one of my centers must go hungry. So he gave transcendental knowledge. He also wanted to make sure that the human being had the best opportunity to revive, to reconnect to the divinity. And he's had many, many conversations with many theologians. And you'll find there's a great commonality in all these major faiths of the world, because we're all aspiring for the same thing. As Prof said, we're looking for joy and happiness and peace. And it's the subtle qualities. When you go to somebody's funeral, you never say he had 15 blue cars or 13 green jackets. But you speak about the subtle qualities. He was kind, he was nice, he was charitable. So those subtle qualities survive the death experience, as you know from the Vedic understanding. So yes, Bhaktivedanta Swami most certainly brought to the world very unique knowledge, and he wanted that knowledge to be shared. And Bhaktivedanta, this Bhaktivedanta Swami lectures, the African BBT, there's a Latin American BBT, there's a Chinese BBT, there is a North European BBT, there's an Arabic BBT. Because the highest gift you can give to any human being is knowledge. And when you have knowledge, then you have your destiny in your hands. So that was his contribution. Like somebody like me, if you take me, I am the most critical and most, very hard to convince me about anything if it doesn't make rational sense. So, but when I read Bhaktivedanta Swami's books, particularly The Science of Self-Realization, the topics he was speaking about are just so clear and concise. You cannot defeat the arguments he's presenting, because he says eventually you're going to die, and what's going to happen? Now you kind of provokes your consciousness. It's true. When that curtain closes, what happens? Yeah. So he's given, and even on his deathbed, he said in his young American disciples, it's a young boy standing at his bed, and he said, "I'm teaching you how to die." And this young boy, hardly 18, is looking at his spiritual master, very elderly person, and he's telling him, "I'm teaching you how to die." So, yes, that was Bhaktivedanta Swami's very unique contribution.
Wonderful. Thank you very much. Certainly looking forward to every year seeing a lecture or learning a little bit more about this great personality, that Bhaktivedanta Swami was. We have about 3 or 4 more minutes, if you'll allow me to ask a few more questions. The one on the screen here, I think both of you can try and tackle for us. It's with regards to, personal responsibility of people on the ground. So usually such conversations are directed to people on the ground. How do we hold those in leadership positions across government, private and corporate, also accountable to ethics and values? Okay, so they want to know, how do we hold people who are in these governmental, influential positions accountable? And to add to that, I want to add, how do we hold the common man accountable for, the values that they celebrate? Professor, you spoke about, we celebrate, sensationalize certain people in the media, but very seldom do we ask, how they got into those positions or why they are famous. So how do we hold everybody, leader, on the ground, ordinary citizen, accountable for the contribution they make to the pot of what we hold high as our value system collectively?
If I may go maybe just quickly to say, my work is always primarily focused on holding those in public power accountable. And this has been the case before I became the pub protector, and it continues to be the case now as somebody in the Tuma Foundation, which is about the democracy, leadership, and literacy. Our entire work as the Tuma Foundation, which is about democracy, leadership, and literacy, is about empowering people to be their own liberators, to understand democracy, to shape democracy, and deepen democracy so that it works for all. And in deepening democracy, the people become an accountability bulwark against impropriety in government. When we think accountability in government, we're always thinking about the courts. We're thinking about politics, where people are held accountable through elections that happen once every 4 to 5 years, and also through the parliamentary debates. We also think that they can be held accountable through administrative constitutional structures such as the Pub Protector, the Auditor General, Human Rights Commission, etc. And then, of course, lastly, through the courts. The area that we are promoting as the Tuma Foundation and as Stellenbosch University is what the World Bank refers to as social accountability. That is me, you, and everyone else holding those who exercise power accountable, whether they are a company or they are government. To be able to hold people accountable, we need to know what is justice, what needs to be done. And hence, one of our projects is a project called Everyday Justice. People understanding how government works. It used to pain me that when I was public protector, a lot of people thought I was in parliament, which means that we have a governance structure where people are supposed to be the people. That is, democracy is people's government, people's power, demos kratos. But there's no people's power when people don't know how the state functions, who's supposed to do what, and when things go wrong, who must they hold accountable and how? Which means, again, I think the BBT, in addition to just teaching people about how to be human, and as part of human values, you can add to your teachings, how does government work and what's your role as a citizen so that people can hold each other accountable? And then you said, how do we hold each other accountable? That's equally important, to hold each other. As part of the social justice chair, for example, we're saying we should hold each other accountable when it comes to social justice. Because if we leave the issue of social justice, which is leveling the playing field so that every human being can fulfill their potential, everyone may be liberated from poverty, hunger, and extreme inequality. That must be something that we all take responsibility for. And how do we hold each other accountable? Through conversations like this, because we're not going to sue each other unless somebody has done something that is wrong. But through conversations like this, where people know that we create the world we live in. The reason we have crime is because of the collective choices that we've made. And just lastly, Nobile and Dr. Singh, what I want to say from a spiritual point of view is that it's not enough to prepare for death. Among us are the living dead, those who live a life of quiet desperation, who need alcohol and drugs to numb the pain that they've caused to themselves. Well, some of it may have been caused by traumas, but because by stealing from humanity, by being corrupt, you create a war in your own soul. When everyone else is gone, when everyone who's been cheering you is gone, you look at yourself in the mirror and you say, I don't like this person. And that's a life of quiet desperation, because no amount of good clothes, no amount of good cars, no amount of adulation from society is going to help you if you're alienated from your own soul. And therefore, it is important that also, just to live a life of joy, that we make sure that we live in resonance with our own values. Thank you.
Powerful message. Thank you so much, Professor. As you were speaking, I had, one more question, perhaps in closing comments from you, Dr. Singh, with regards to becoming a society that in an effort to hold each other accountable, takes the joy out of, coming forward to say, I will lead, I will take a chance to be a leader in society, because we are so punitive when somebody makes a mistake. So how do we morally, progress without becoming a society that breaks down the confidence and the desire of anybody to pursue a position that is required, to be responsible for fear that they may make mistakes and be judged? So what is the secret to constructive criticism, effective self-reflection that then leads to an empowered choice in the future to change behavior and make more sound moral decisions?
Bhaktivedanta Swami said that become like a bee that looks for honey and not a fly that looks for sores. The bee that looks for honey and not a fly that looks for sores. So fault finding is there. But the thing is, the most fundamental duty we have in our immediate surrounding, we start from that, from ourselves, how we behave. You get stopped by a traffic officer, you've broken the law, and the person wants something. It's your moment of truth. It starts from those little incremental things. Then you can go to your family, and it gets wider into your workplace, and then eventually a whole nation. So you can change the consciousness of a nation by changing the behavior of an individual person. Divinity is not a fugitive in the sky. It's not somebody you speak to or pray to and doesn't answer. Notice something. Every human being, all 57 million South Africans, we all have a unique fingerprint. Every single one of us. Therefore, if you do something and you go to the police station, they take your fingerprint. So we're all individuals, and we'll all have different ideas. We all, just wired differently. But there are certain core things, certain core principles that we must accept are not negotiable. We should never turn a blind eye if we see some injustice or some prejudice. We should act on those things, So we become better persons. So that's not finding fault. That's like the bee looking for the honey. Because somebody who may be less fortunate than us, or maybe in a lesser position to act for themselves, if we extend ourselves, religiosity doesn't just mean some highfalutin reaching out into the sky for an embrace. It means expressing love to people around us in the best way we know is by sharing knowledge, sharing a meal, things like that. So I would say that, to answer that core question you asked, it's not really it's not really that we're penalizing persons who make mistakes, because we're all human. As a matter of fact, for that person who does make a mistake, and the leader particularly who stands up and says, I've made a mistake, you would find society would rally around such a person and will respect and appreciate and love that person more. But if there's obfuscation or any kind of trying to shift what was there, then just the wrath of society is on the head of that person. So that honesty and the hallmark of any great society is to produce these high conscious individuals. That's what I would say, Nabile.
Thank you so much. We are unfortunately out of time. Always happens when you have such a thought-provoking conversation with such expert speakers. It's been a real pleasure and a privilege to hear from you both. And I would like to call back Mr. Nkosi, who has been listening in the background, to do our vote of thanks.
Thank you so much, Nobile. Thank you, Professor Madonsela. Thank you, Dr. Singh. Such an intriguing lecture for myself personally, but I can also tell from the questions and comments that have come up, it has been a very thought-provoking and eye-opening lecture for our audience. So I wanted to thank each and every single one of you for actually allowing us to delve so deeply into this topic. And we wish we had more time, but unfortunately we don't. So without any further ado, let me just formally thank our honored guest, Professor Thuli Madonsela and her foundation, the Tuma Foundation, for your support and participation. I think many of the points that you raised about shared values, how this is the right time for us as a society, as a world, to be having these sorts of collective conversations with each other, because beyond sort of any institutional designation, there's our common humanity. So on behalf of BBT Africa, I'd just like to extend my appreciation to you again, Professor. And if there's any way the BBT can be of service to you and your foundation in any way, we're only an email or a phone call away. We'd love to continue this relationship of working and building community and enriching human values together. So thank you very much for that. I'd like to thank our keynote speaker for the 7th annual Bhaktivedanta Swami lecture, Dr. Singh. I think you delivered an eloquent presentation that was truly in line with Srila Prabhupada's teachings and the essence of his teachings, namely compassion for each other and identifying ourselves with a supreme or a higher cause or purpose. I think you brought that to light so beautifully and contextualized it expertly within the challenges that we're facing today in the world. Thank you again for doing that, availing your time and giving us your such a beautiful lecture. Thank you, Dr. Singh. We appreciate your time. Then our Master of Ceremonies, Ngobile, thank you so much for facilitating this conversation. It has been, without you, I don't think the conversation would have flowed so smoothly. Thank you for engaging the audience the way you did, and we hope to have you on for our future lectures as well. And then I'd just like to extend my gratitude as the Executive Manager of BBT Africa to our BBT Africa events team who worked tirelessly to put this event together. The team headed by Sureka Singh, Mathura Mandala, Tirumala, and of course, our technical support team, Krishna Gyan. You did a phenomenal job on putting this together. Despite all the challenges, you pulled it off, and I'm really grateful to the team and the extended team that supports you for putting this event together. Then last but not least, my gratitude extends out to you, our audience, for engaging and participating throughout this discussion. May this just be the beginning of these discussions amongst us. When we speak about human values and we speak about integrity, these values are imbibed, these values are taken in when we first introspect with ourselves. So may this be the beginning of that process of introspection for ourselves and the beginning of so many more conversations and discussions of this nature. Then finally, I'd just like to leave with a quote that I picked up. I think it's so apt, seeing as how Dr. Singh and Professor Madonsela spoke about this point of education and how educating our children right from the earliest of ages about the importance of human values. The quote is as follows: if we actually want to make the world a better place and give joy and fulfillment to our students and empower them to give the same for others, we have to build the foundation of our education on human values. So I'll leave you that, my dear audience and everyone tuning in, as a point of meditation that we can take out. Please do interact with us on our social media channels, etc., as Nobile will elaborate on in her closing. And thank you again on behalf of BBT Africa. It's been a pleasure to host you today.
Thank you very much, Mfundo, and to you, continue your work in the BBT, and we look forward to another year with another topic that leads us closer and closer to our spiritual, social, ethical health as a society. Please do, post, continue to give us your feedback. You are already on our Facebook page if you're watching live. There's also the YouTube channel. You can also visit the BBT's website. But thank you very much. Thank you for indulging us with the time, and have a wonderful, wonderful evening.
Thank you.